timely press conference. I'm David Shoebridge, one of the Greens MPs, and I'm coming to you here from the New South Wales Parliament. And I'd like to commence by acknowledging that the land I'm on is Gadigal land. This is First Nations land, and pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging of the land we're on today. And I think commit all of us to work in partnership to ensure First Nations peoples have self-respect, self-determination, and a fair share of the wealth of this continent. Today, we have come together to talk about what is a very burning public policy issue, but also a very burning personal issue for thousands and thousands of Australians. And that is the Coalition's harsh, unjust, and grossly inappropriate travel ban to prevent people returning from India. We have four terrific speakers at this press conference. Our first speaker will be Amar Singh, who is the president and founder of Turbans for Australia. We're then lucky to have Senator Marine Fariki, the Greens New South Wales Senator in the Federal Parliament. Vikrant Kishore, who's an academic, a filmmaker, and the co-founder of South Asians for Inclusiveness. And finally, Miraj Khan, the co-founder, one of the co-founders of the Humanism Project. I would like to get to the speakers as soon as we can, but I'll just start with some very brief initial observations. It is extraordinary when you cast your mind back the last 12 months, how it is that we came to have this targeted unfair ban for travel from India. We know that at different times in the last 12 months, the infection rates and indeed the fear in communities, but the infection rates, raw numbers and proportion of people being infected in countries which we have long-standing traditional links to, like the United Kingdom, parts of Europe and the United States, were greater than they've ever been in terms of the proportion and at different times the numbers than we saw from India. And yet the coalition government under Scott Morrison decided only to place this targeted travel ban against India. I don't think we can ignore that fact and ignore how India has been targeted and question what was the motivation for that particular targeted approach towards India. But it's also raised a number of deep, previously, I think in some ways, hidden unfairnesses about how that the limits on international travel during the pandemic have operated unfairly, especially in relation to bringing families together, and especially in relation to some long-standing issues regarding spousal visas. And we've literally had families who have been separated for over 12 to almost 18 months now, children growing up without parents. And the announcement very recently that the coalition government will produce perhaps 2 repatriation flights in the future will go nowhere near what is needed to address that long-standing gap that's been in public policy, that targeted gap, I would say, in relation to connections between family and the diaspora and friends and colleagues between India and Australia. So with those initial observations, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Amar Singh.
Thank you, David, Marine, and all the other fellow people on the Zoom meeting. Thanks for your time. Look, we all are aware of the situation that's sort of changing day by day in India, and Australians that are stuck in India. It is appalling to see that they have been deserted by their own people, their own government, their own home. These people don't have a home otherwise from Australia. They're tax-paying citizens that deserve to be back with their families in their own homes, the place that they belong. They don't belong in India. We may choose to go to holiday any part of the world, but we come home to Australia because this is our home. We have been dealing with this issue for close to 12 months now, since the first quarantine ban come in and flights were being sort of put at restricted numbers. We have seen a lot of these people that we were talking to 12 months ago or near about still stuck in India. There's different visa categories. The government is still issuing student visas, and people are being forced to study remotely from India, paying the same fees in India. Whereas in Australia, they had a chance to earn a wage, working at 20 hours, and now it's 40 hours full time. So they are not getting any financial benefit, but they're being made to study from India. Some of the key points that I wanted to touch on was, firstly, the mental health. I've had different Zoom meetings with people stuck in India. It is absolutely appalling to see people my age burst into tears on a Zoom meeting just because they are so stuck in this situation they can't get out of. The dilemma was, why did these people go to India in the first place? We were highly cultural people. We appreciate family and value family more than anything else. For a person to be here in Australia today, be it any of us here today, especially from the subcontinent, our parents have a 99% contribution to that, be it financial, be it guidance. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. So nobody wants to leave their parent on a deathbed thinking, sorry, I can't come, because it's not allowed. Even now we see in many Facebook groups, people asking how they can go back because one of the family members or their father have passed away. There's the issue with charter flights, the kids being left in India. I've heard that the Darwin facility is not letting parents stay with the kids. So how do you expect a minor to come back to Australia and stay in a 14-day room without any other supervision, or are they going to be put in with someone else? This is totally wrong. It goes against the very basics of society, and not to mention child safety. And also, people have lost a lot of money in paying for private charter flights. I've spoken to one guy. He booked on a flight for his mum and his wife, and they lost $6,000. Where is sort of remedy for that? Where is the solution for that by the government? The COVID assistance loans that they're offering is $2,000 per person, which doesn't even cover your quarantine, and it's an interest-free loan. So why isn't it $10,000 so people can at least go, okay, I can pay for my quarantine, I can pay for a flight, at least I can have some money on the side. These people should be given one-off payment. This is my opinion, to cover some living expenses in India, because if they were here, they would be getting some Centrelink allowance. So why aren't they being given? They're just being forgotten, written off the charts, and going, well, not our problem. Like I said, medical facilities in India are an issue as well, because most of these people don't have Indian ID or Indian passports. So during COVID, they have been asked to produce an Indian photo ID, which is called an Aadhaar card. They don't have one. Many people are sort of screaming for that as well. Counseling sessions. Some people have pregnant partners here in Australia that are living by themselves, so their stress is through the roof. And a lack of flight information. Many have said this. So these are the key points that I wanted to raise. And overall, the whole community is affected by this tragedy, that any of us who are non-Anglo-Saxons are still branded un-Australian by the virtue that you're just brown or whatever skin color you are, you're not Australian enough on this matter. So it is grossly unfair and highly unlikely that Australia is treating their own citizens this way, and this has created a sense of insecurity among people who lived here 40 years, saying, am I ever going to be Australian enough? So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Summer. Grossly unfair and deeply discriminatory, I think, would be the neatest summary we would see of this particular policy. And we have seen some appalling efforts in the Conservative press in particular of seeking to blame Indian Australians for the fact that they travel back to be with sick relatives, to provide that support and make them seek to make them the target to justify the government's actions. And who would not travel to ensure that their family are safe and secure? And of course, we have an obligation to make sure that they can come home and are supported while they're in India as well. Our next speaker is Senator Mehreen Fariki, my colleague from the Federal Parliament. Mehreen has been a powerful advocate in this space, and I welcome her now.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. And Amar, thank you so much for that information and also for your heartfelt comments. I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am on, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We are on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded. This is, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. I also do want to thank the Humanism Project for organizing this event. And I'll start by saying that my heart goes out to everyone in India and the subcontinent overall who really are suffering the terrible impacts of the current wave of COVID-19. So my thoughts and my heart is really with all of you. When Australia's recent decision to threaten, firstly, returning Australian citizens and permanent residents with jail time was absolutely horrific, discriminatory, and racist. I think you've got to call a spade a spade. So many of us were so shocked that the Australian government would close the door to people in the way that it did. And it really was a reminder for many of us who are non-white people in this country, that our citizenship will always be conditional. And it's quite an unfortunate fact, and one which is kind of difficult to swallow, but that's the way it is in this country. And let's be clear that people see through this double standard. They see this for what it is. I mean, there were never any such restrictions placed on returning Australians from the United States or from Europe when the COVID crisis was overwhelming those parts of the world during the last 12 months or so. The government has now said that the ban will be lifted as scheduled on May 15th. And this is, of course, welcome news, but only a small number of repatriation flights will be available, and that's not going to cut it. And I think still the government's refusal to take COVID-19 positive cases as part of the repatriation is absolutely and utterly shameful. Healthcare is a human right. Your visa, your citizenship, or your COVID status shouldn't change that. Australia should be flying any sick citizens or permanent residents home for treatment. And we can do this. We've heard epidemiologists in the last couple of days saying how we can actually have separate flights and minimize the risk of people that we fly here who might be COVID positive. And we should be doing everything we can also to provide aid and assistance to India at this time of dire need. The sliver of good news is that the backlash to the government's action has been really strong. So I thank everyone in the community who has had the courage to speak out against this racist discriminatory decision. And now we must keep up the pressure. The Greens and other crossbenchers will be pushing in the Senate this week when I go back there today for the ban to be reversed ahead of its expiration on May 15th. And we need to make sure this ends as quickly as possible and something like this never happens again.
Thank you very much, Maureen. And that concept that one person's citizenship and one person's rights to be an Australian is somehow qualified on the basis of the colour of their skin or their home or their parents' home, I think is something that has really cut through in this debate. And I too commend the powerful advocacy of broad cross-section of the community who pointed that out and said, surely we must move on from that. So thank you, Maureen. Our next speaker is Vikrant Kishore. And I've got to say, that voice of inclusion, that voice of tolerance, that's cutting across political boundaries, and other boundaries is something that is so desperately needed in this debate. Vikrant, we're very lucky to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Many thanks, David. Before I start, I would like to recognize the various traditional lands where we are located and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge the land, waterways, and airways of the Wurundjeri people and pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. And with that, I start. And I totally agree with the comments made earlier by David, Amar, and Mehreen as well, who very vocally, put her thoughts and really talked about this whole discriminatory and racist policy of the Australian government, and which really made us feel second-rated citizen in a way. So of course, there's no denying of the fact that India is going through a huge crisis at the moment due to COVID-19, which we never thought that would happen. And initially, I was really happy with the way, we got the Australian government to react and, wanting to help India. But then the moment this particular thing snowballed and it became something bigger, and suddenly this, blockage or stopping of the flights or wanting to just, create a kind of an iron curtain, especially for Indians, it was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking at this stage where many of the Australians in India are stranded, and it's becoming a kind of a problem as to why. And everybody has questioned that when things were going haywire in Europe, in USA, Australia never responded in that harsh manner. Why India? Okay, and if India, then what happened to that 1 year when we had to prepare and we had to respond for our citizens. Our responsibility towards our citizens should never be, over, or just by blocking them to come to their country, or making them feel as if they have made a criminal decision. And Amar also pointed out that people are being ridiculed or making, and then I see the social media full of those kind of very, very harsh comments. Why were those harsh comments not made when, people in the West, they were suffering, or, we were wanting to reach out to them? But when it comes to India or South Asia, or Asians even, that kind of problem is always there. This needs to be questioned. Australia is not an island anymore. It's a multicultural country. It's a multiculturalism that we really, really uphold and we are very proud of. And then suddenly what happens to that multiculturalism concept and thinking when we start talking about, any specific country which comes from Asia, or in this particular situation, India, where Australia has been wanting to, form really good relationships and all. So yes, I do agree Australia should be careful and protective and should take care and take all precautions to keep its people safe. But if Australians who are stranded in India during this precarious moment, and if they are left without any support and no option to come back home, then it is problematic, discriminatory, and racist. This needs to be rethought, reworked, and challenged. And that's what we all are doing. We are worried, like I'm worried every day about my family at the moment. Within my family also, my brother was down with COVID, my sister and my nephew are down with COVID. But of course, they are not, residents of Australia, but that doesn't make me, feel strongly about what is happening. But I know my cousins who are residents or Australians who are stuck in India at the moment. And then they are not the citizens. So as Amar said about the vaccine, you have to be an Indian citizen to get the vaccine or be in the first list. So what is happening to the Australians there? So I want to see some kind of, a particular plan about people who are stranded there as to what the government is doing or what kind of help it is being, given to them. Also, as that has been mentioned about the mental well-being or the health, it's everybody is at the moment struggling. And I can see the struggle is happening at every front, even to get access to oxygen or even basic medication. In India, it's kind of a tragedy. It's a tragic story coming out. And are we ready to leave our citizens out there to become another tragedy or become another story out there coming from India? No. So while we are responsible and we should be responsible, to help or do that outreach to India, but our also is a responsibility to take care of our citizens no matter what. So, better quarantine system, having flights. Again, Marine also talked about, special flights where you can put in, people accordingly, who are vaccinated or not, things like that. So we need to be really cautious and careful, but not leave people thinking that they are not getting any support by our government. And one thing I have to also say that the kind of phenomenal response that I've seen from the diasporic group, especially the South Asian diasporic group, coming out and reaching out to the Indians and their Indian family and helping out, it has been tremendous effort that I've seen. The kind of response that I wanted to see from the government actually came from the diasporic groups first and foremost. And I'm proud of being part of this kind of diasporic group who's not sitting and just, looking helplessly. Diasporic group has been really, really in the forefront to fight and give all kinds of support. But this needs to be also through the government, and that kind of outreach with the diasporic community should have also been there. So yeah, there's so many things, and through this forum, I would like to say, and I would like to end my particular, this talk, is that, yeah, we are feeling very, very saddened, especially by non-support or lack of support, and only government's response coming after when it gets a kind of reaction from the community, which shouldn't be there. If we call ourselves multicultural, or even that should be the last thing. Australians, no matter what color, should be supported. No matter in which part of the world, should be supported. It shouldn't be Australians based in USA and Europe. They will be the ones who will be treated as VIP. The ones coming from India or South Asia or Asian countries should be the last people out there, So yeah, I'm quite overwhelmed and really, really impacted by the things are going and every day, because so many people are impacted and near and dear ones. And if my timeline every day is filled with people passing away or rest in peace messages every day I see. It's not a good feeling, and definitely I would want all Australians to be brought back home, no matter in what conditions they are. They should be helped. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vikram. Yes, I mean, the timeline's filled with despair, notices of death. It is so distressing. The crisis is so real. Of course, our hearts and our resources should go out to people, whoever, across the board in India. But we do have a special obligation to those Australian residents, those Australian citizens. And I think the discussion that's come through here shows how there is a double punishment. That if you don't have the documentation as an Indian citizen, then you can be excluded from treatment and vaccines, and yet you're not being helped by your own government in Australia to come and have the care that you need. And that gap is so real that I think, for me, if nothing else comes from this discussion, highlighting that gap and highlighting why that reinforces the desperate need to live up to the promise of multiculturalism in Australia, not just when it's easy, but also when it's tough, and to ensure that those Australian residents and citizens are brought home urgently, I think has come through loud and clear. Well, our final speaker, before we go to questions from those journalists and others who are in attendance, is Miraj Khan, who has been one of the co-founders of the Humanism Project. And as Maureen said earlier, I do want to thank all the groups who came together to pull this together, Turbans for Australia, the Humanism Project and others. And what this has shown today is the diaspora coming together, putting common humanity at the forefront, these common uniting demands at the forefront. I personally take a huge amount of strength from it for the reasons you said too, Vikrant. Miraj, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you one and all for joining today. As you can see that the emotions are high, they are running high. There are so many different talks. You have to switch between, you're pretty much living in parallel reality when you're living here in Australia, because things over here are getting pretty normal. Whereas back home, there are friends and family who are really, truly affected. Not one single person back home has not been affected by COVID. And the mental health, that's one thing that I would like to raise. The mental health for all people onshore and offshore, that's definitely affected massively. People over here are living with a bit of survivor's guilt, saying, all right, we are safe, but their mental health is absolutely affected. People over there are affected because they can't come back to their partners. One thing that I would like to highlight over here is the unfair processing time for the partner visas of people who are in a relationship. They've been separated already for the past 12 months. It is an unfair processing system at this stage, and I feel that the Australian government must broaden their travel ban and bring in an exemption to include committed and visa approved partners to come back and join their families. They are going to see marriages falling apart. They are going to see children being unable to have proper parents, and the partners who are living on shore are going to be running high on emotions. It is an extraordinary time. It is a very extraordinary time. And I think, you know, with the things that are happening back home, there are expectations of a second wave going really high by the end of May. Then there is an expectation of third wave. People who are living there, who are our Australian citizens, partners, they are really afraid. What sort of a support system have we got there for them to feel safe? What sort of communication is going through to them from the government here? And I think the country that successfully deals with a threat like COVID should be able to open doors and allow people on, you know, especially people who are citizens from this country, but not close the doors on people who are suffering. Obviously, there are, you know, second standards mentioned within this conversation. I wouldn't go into that pretty deep, but with a stronger quarantine system, Australia could offer more to those who are trapped in such uncertain circumstances. This has never happened in the past. We hope it never happens in the future, but what we've got at hand, we can't continue to go on with stricter and stringent rules with what's going on. More flights needed, support needed, communication needed, and we're all coming together, and we need the government to come together with us.
Thank you very much, Raj. You cannot help but feel that Indian Australians are being punished for the structural failings of the federal Morrison government, for getting the vaccination rollout happening in time, for having adequate, humane and well-distributed quarantine facilities available to be doing their job, to be creating the conditions to keep all of us, no matter where we come from, no matter where we are at any one time, safe. So with that final contribution, I will hand it over to question time. Niraj from the South Asian Times, I'll go to you first.
Hi, can you listen to me, David? Yeah.
Coming through nice and clear.
Yes, thank you for organizing this press conference. And being a journalist, I won't comment much, but instead ask you a question, which I think is also a suggestion that despite all the issues, the first consignment of aid from Australia has gone to India. I suppose it has landed there in Delhi, probably. And this is Australian taxpayers' money spent and well spent, I suppose. But I have a feeling, which is, and this is coming from the Indian press, which I have read in many Indian newspapers and magazines and websites, that the distribution is a bit, we are not sure what happens once the, let us, for example, for me, it's Australian aid more important. What happens to the aid once it reaches the airport? And the Indian government has, for example, notified procedure to distribute foreign aid to different states in India, 26, 27, 28 states, you know. But most of the press reports say that it is being held up there and no one knows where it is going, and some states not getting it. So my suggestion is that if as member of parliament, you people can raise this issue, that it should be monitored by the Australian High Commission in New Delhi, Chanakyapuri, to see that the Australian aid which goes, I'm sure it might be going anyway, but still it needs to be monitored because it should go in the proper way, you know, and the people who actually need it. And there should be no discrimination in that. That's my question.
Well, I think it's an excellent point, and I think many people have been, if you follow some of the discussion that's happening, you know, across what's left of the sort of free press in India, very real concerns about how some of the initial preparations were not well distributed. You know, rapid build oxygen plants attached to hospitals and the like were not being fairly distributed across India. And I think absolutely we should be asking for the tracking and a report back from the High Commissioner about where Australian aid is going. But we need to be careful, of course, that we don't engage in that debate in a way that would make Australians less willing to provide the essential support that is needed. And I think it's getting that balance right, Raj, and I think getting that balance right is important in this space.
I don't mean that actually. My meaning is just to, we should know where it is going, basically.
Oh no, I 100% agree with you, Niraj. I 100% agree with you. I think that is essential, and not just for the purpose of value for money for Australian taxpayers, but to actually ensure the help's getting where it's needed. And having some observation of that, external observation of that, might be extremely useful. I might just pass to Maureen if she has further comments in that.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Neeraj. And I think there's a lot more aid that needs to be and support that needs to be delivered to India and the people living there at the moment than Australia has given. But of course, we can work in partnership with the people who are distributing aid. And exactly to your points, to kind of make sure that it is delivered where it's needed, but it has to be like a partnership, because it's the people on the ground there who are working in India who know where it needs to go. So from our perspective, of course, we need to monitor and make sure where it goes. We need to make sure that a lot more of it goes to India and other countries. Australia has been cutting their age budget for years on now. So we need to do that. And we can work in partnership with the Indian people and the government of India to make sure that it is delivered to the right places.
Thank you very much.
And I know the Humanism Project too. We're having some calling together some links with some Indian doctors and the broader diaspora, and getting that direct information through the diaspora as well. And that should be fed into the decision making and the monitoring by the Australian government. I don't know if Miraj or others wanted to speak, or any of the other speakers wanted to contribute about how the
I'm trying to get information through my sources, and let us see what comes. I don't have anything at the moment because we already have a few deaths in our family and friends, and one of my friend is very serious, so I was a bit stressed up because of that, and whenever a phone call comes, we are scared of picking up the phone. So I'm trying to do it, but if it is raised at the political level, it might be going from the proper place, quite possible, but still we should have a look at it. That's it.
Miraj?
Yeah, David, thank you once. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks once again. Yes, there are heaps of projects happening internally. The diaspora, like Vikrant mentioned, are coming together and trying to help out each other. Various projects happening online. There are consultations being organized by doctors who are onshore over here for people who are, heavily affected but aren't able to get into hospitals. So not just from Australia, I think overseas, everywhere, the entire diaspora is coming together and trying to do things that could be a part of the project that, happens during a pandemic and organized by a government.
Do either of the other panel speakers want to contribute at this point, or we'll throw to the next question? Well, I'll throw to the next question. Do we have another question? Vivek.
Vivek, yeah.
Thank you, David, and thank you, all of you. Actually, Amar Singh ji raised a very, very important issue of affordability of the tickets, of the quarantine facilities, and rents after people arrive and resume their life, because many of them have lost their jobs, have lost their livelihoods. They have been paying rents while they are stuck in India. And most of them, I have interviewed people who could not travel to Australia because the tickets are so expensive. So Amar Singh ji raised this issue, but I have not seen any opposition parties raising these issues in parliament or outside and making these demands why government is charging these people for quarantine facilities, why they are being charged for so expensive tickets and people can't afford it. Is this in Green's agenda, David?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I've had increasing numbers of people contacting me very concerned about the fact that they simply cannot afford the repatriation process. And as has been pointed out in this discussion, if you've got family members who have lost jobs, you yourself may have lost your job, how can you suddenly find $10,000 or $15,000 and more if you have multiple family members to repatriate and engage in quarantine? I think we should be clear. One of the real reasons why the Commonwealth has refused to actually implement quarantine facilities is because the federal law prohibits the Commonwealth from charging for them, whereas that prohibition does not operate at a state or a territory level. And so that is why I think one of the reasons we've seen the Commonwealth so reticent to move, because they would actually have to do the right thing and provide for the quarantine facilities, if it was made under a biosecurity determination, provide for the quarantine facilities and actually do what the government should do and pay the costs of that to keep us all safe. And if a government is mandating quarantine, of course they should be paying for the cost of that mandated quarantine. But I think one of the points that very practical short-term measures that's been raised was the measure raised by Amara about increasing the the interest-free loan from a minimum 2,000, from a maximum 2,000 to a minimum 10,000. But I might also pass to the other speakers and Maureen if they had some contributions on this.
Yeah, Vivek, thank you so much for that question. I mean, we are in the height of a crisis, right? People are dying, people are getting sick. There is absolutely no case in which the federal government shouldn't be providing quarantine facilities and safety for people to be brought here at the cost to the government. I mean, this is what caring for your people means. So the government should absolutely be making sure that people are not left stranded in situations where they will get sick and die just because they don't have the money to be able to come here. That is absolutely unfair and ridiculous. I mean, you might remember last year when the pandemic started, there was the slogan that we are all in this together. But to be really frank, we were never all in this together. The people who were left out high and dry of any support from the federal government were migrant workers. It was workers who look like many of us look like here today. It was international students. So we were actually never in this together. But in this instance, where there's a crisis unfolding, federal government has to take responsibility and make sure that every citizen, permanent resident who wants to be here is brought here, brought safely and without a cost to them.
Did you want to contribute on that?
Yeah, sorry. I think thank you for raising that issue again. It is absolutely shocking to see that as migrants, the government just assume we are very resourceful and we'll be able to pull connections or ask loans from parents or friends or family. That's what's happening because nobody has $10,000 or $15,000 lying around to be able to afford this and pay for this. And these are Australian citizens, so there has to be payment on that loan. That has to be increased, and also one-off payment for people who are still stuck in India. That should be given straight away so people can actually afford things there because they're living off parents or family members there. They don't have an income. For citizens, they've gone on a visa to visit family members. They're not allowed to work. So are we saying that it's okay for them to be holding illegal jobs or something like that, But when you apply for the visa, there's strict conditions to go to India as well as an Australian citizens. So they should be given an immediate crisis payment, but also that loan should go up as well. Thank you.
Again, it's that caught both ways, trapped both ways, isn't it? Not supported by Social Security, can't work, not given the health facilities. I think the concept of a crisis payment to citizens trapped overseas is something we should be throwing directly into the public debate. Next question.
If I can just add that these facilities are, whatever is available for citizens or permanent residents. And temporary residents are going through a very tough time because they don't have any support at all. Whatever we have, they don't even have that. So that's another issue, I think, if it can be raised in the parliament also.
Well, it's a public health issue. And for me, it's a fundamental tenet as a Greens MP that public health measures need to be paid for and provided for across the board by the public. And there is, that just seems to me to be a fundamental. If you're put in a public hospital because of illness, Medicare will cover you. But if you're put in a quarantine under a public order, somehow or other, that has to be paid by some unspecified private means. That is so obviously unfair. Public health orders need to be funded by and fairly provided by the public. The next, Maureen?
Yeah, I'm just going to say we've been raising it from day one, Vivek, and we'll keep pushing for it because it doesn't matter whether you're a temporary citizen here or a permanent resident or a permanent citizen. If you're here in this situation, then our governments have a responsibility to look after everyone.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. Do we have another question?
So there's a question.
Yes.
So there's a question from Greenland.
Yeah, I see that, Alex.
I just wanted to, I didn't want to, if someone else has got a question, I don't want to cut them off. But the question I wanted to ask is, I guess there's a tension in this whole discussion about the Australian government should be looking after Australian citizens trapped in India. And clearly, I think this is a absolutely racist decision by the government. And I'm glad to see it's being strongly resisted around this meeting and in other places. Linked to that, there is also the other idea that, you know, Australian citizens shouldn't be seen as like some special category of people. I mean, like, this is obviously a humanitarian crisis that deserves attention in its own right. And I guess that's the question I've got, is that, like, what more, how can we engage in this discussion in a way that's not, I guess, privileging Australian citizens? And I guess, you know, I'm thinking about the vaccine doses that Australia's got. You know, oversupply has ordered more vaccine doses than are required for all the entire population of Australia, as other wealthy countries have as well. I feel that Australia should be doing more, especially in the case of this outbreak in India. And I'm wondering if there's comments from the, you know, from the people and the panelists here about that.
Well, I might throw first to Vikram, but could I say I've felt shamed by the Australian government's position, particularly on patents in the face of this pandemic, not willing to say that patent law should be set aside for public health across the world to ensure the lowest possible cost vaccine. So that should be a minimum expectation from our government. Vikram?
Yeah, I agree that the responsibility is quite a lot and needs to be done. And what we see also during this pandemic is this so-called particular term that is coming out, the medical apartheid. Okay, and this is about the privileged people getting access to things, be it the privileged countries in the West, or in India also. There is a big division between the haves and have-nots, which is also a big concern about, you know, there are lots of discussions also happening around, you know, people who are marginalized from marginalized communities, marginalized class or castes as well. So, and what is Australia doing? So when we are also sending medical aids or things like that, who are the beneficiaries? Okay, and that is one thing which also Marion also said that, and David said that we should monitor that. But how much are we helping, or whose hand it is going? All those things are a big question around things. So there are so many questions around that, and the responsibility as a nation for us as to how we support our people, and also not to just create a kind of a VIP structure around our citizens, but be helpful. And as what Vivek was also talking about, the temporary residents, and that also made me, you know, the other day I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is on a temporary visa, but well, his visa is under processing, but he's offshore, so he can't come back. And yet he's waiting for almost more than a year for the visa to get processed. And he was under the impression that it would be done in 2 or 3 months, because he had earlier than that, he was waiting for 6 months. So it's been almost 2 years, and the offshore visa has not yet been processed. So he's not looking for jobs in India, because he was wondering that he might just come in to Australia. So he's been just sitting out there without a job, and now not sure if when he'll come back. So there are so many questions around, and that's what every day a new discussion keeps on happening. But for me, I always feel that what is our responsibility as a nation? What is our responsibility as citizens sitting here thinking about others, or people who are there in India or other countries battling with this particular pandemic and not getting enough support? So yeah, I think this is a good forum where we should raise these questions, and through David and Marion, we should find that outlet that those are raised in Parliament, and you know, those answers should be sought. We can only raise questions at this moment.
Maureen, has there been any transparency at a federal level about what the surplus will be used for?
Not at all. There hasn't been any whatsoever. And I think, Alex, you've raised a very good point. And we know how the existing structural inequalities have become so much starker during the pandemic. And just on a point that David raised, I want to say I've been very strongly advocating and pushing hard for the TRIPS waiver for Australia. And, you know, we've had some good luck when US now has actually agreed to that. So this week as well, I'm going to be pushing very hard for Australia to come to that party, because I think that's going to make a big difference for the global South countries in terms of accessing vaccines. But the problem we have in Australia is we botched up, Scott Morrison has botched up our own vaccine rollout as well, which I think is a point some others made, is having a huge impact on how many people who live here and are unable to see their relatives. And I mean, it's a very personal thing for me as well. I haven't seen my 84-year-old mother in 2 years. And I can tell you she's in Pakistan, and almost every day that I talk to her, the only one thing that she says to me is that she doesn't want to die without seeing me. So, this is so personal and so hard for so many of us whose relatives and close ones are, dying and who we can't see. But this government doesn't really recognize that because they've only used migrants as, economically benefiting Australia. And when it comes to supporting us, we've seen that we don't count. So I think it's amazing to see, as you said, Vikrant, diaspora getting together. And I have been very proud as well of our communities really getting together and pushing hard for our governments to do the fair thing.
No, I see, Deepak, you had a question, and then Niraj, and then we will have to wrap it up because we're coming to our 1 hour time limit on the session. Deepak.
Thanks, David. One big issue that Miraj raised was the visas for partners and relatives, and especially children. They are not being issued, or they are taking a very long time, and that is becoming a humanitarian crisis for some people. Very recently, I met someone who delivered her baby in India just before a month or so before the lockdown, when she was with her parents. And then because of the lockdown, she came back to Australia just before the lockdown happened, and her parents were expected to join her a couple of weeks later and bring the child along with them. And because of all that has happened, and the visa is not being issued, they are stuck at home. So there are many such stories where partners are stuck in one part of the world, and they haven't seen their partners for more than a year or two. That's again something I think that needs to be taken up very strongly. It's a very important issue, not just for Indians, but for Australians living around the world and their partners.
Who would like to address that? I know that I've seen communication very recently about the prospective marriage visa, where applicants are caught in this impossible bind. You're not allowed to marry. You have to marry onshore in Australia, but you can't. But of course, you can't bring your prospective partner onshore in order to have the marriage. And it's like some sort of impossible riddle that can't be solved, brought to you by the Australian government, and at a terrible cost too, like some $7,700 to be caught in this administrative impossibility. Marsh, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, absolutely, David. I think it is extremely unfair, unrealistic, and taxing. There, like I mentioned before, things will fall apart for a lot of people over here, which will take a toll on mental conditions, financially incapable, because once it's a unit, family unit working together. We are a very hard working class of people. We are here to contribute. We have been contributing to the taxes. It's our rights to expect the support from the government. And I think just making it impossible for us to get into, get back to our family is just impossible. Citizens, partners, and, partner visas are just, even if you have a partner who is a citizen here, you can't get them here on board. You can't. It's impossible. And it's going to get worse if it's not addressed as soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's like some sort of Kafka novel, only we're actually living it right now. Mark, Did you want to speak to that briefly?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly raise one thing. That many people who booked in charter flights, they stand to lose a lot of money, and that should be addressed as well. That any pre-booked charter flights that have been already sold out should be allowed back to Australia, because average mum and dads will lose a lot of money on that. And they should also maybe use Qantas fleet and subsidise the flights, because Qantas has been helped out fairly in big dollar amount during COVID. So that was my only thing, that charter flights that have been paid for already shouldn't be cancelled, because there's a couple that got cancelled and people stand to lose money on that. Thank you.
David, if I could just quickly add and say that a lot of the work that my team has been doing over the past year and a bit more, and a lot of my Greens colleagues, has been actually helping individual people get those visas and get them reunited. So that has been a huge part of the work that we have been doing, but it is a case-by-case basis, and it really does take so much time to push hard for cases. There has to be a better way than this.
Niraj, time for a final question, so I'll go to you.
To me, yeah. Yeah, actually, Marine already mentioned about the patent issue, which was raised by India, South Africa, and 100 countries. And America did a good thing by saying that we won't press for it, but the European Union is not ready for it. So I have no idea what is Australia's stand actually on it, and what do they say about it, Scott Morrison? Anything Marine can tell us?
Yeah, well, not much, except that there's no need to do this. And they come up with excuses to say, no, this is not the holdup. The holdup is that those countries don't have the capacity to manufacture. So they're just coming up with excuses. So hopefully this week, Neeraj, I'm going to actually ask some questions direct to the government, and also do some other things to actually flesh that out. And I'm sure that there's no leg to stand on for them. So I'm hoping to push that issue a lot more this week.
Please inform us immediately once you raise it, once you come out of the chamber, so that I can break the news.
Yep, will do.
Thank you.
Let's hope we can break some positive news, and the Australian change from opposition to support, because I mean it does. I find it disturbs my sense of even basic decency that we would ever be talking about intellectual property rights trumping the need to get vaccines out at a time of a big issue.
Well, it's all about corporate profits. That's what it comes up to the end, and we know where Australian politicians stand on that, with the corporations and the billionaires, sadly.
So I might just throw to each of our speakers, maybe in reverse order to how we commenced this this press conference, for any brief final concluding comments before we wind up this Zoom session. So I'm going to you first, Marj.
My only request to the government is show us UK. Show us UK. Show us that we matter. Show us that we are not a second-class citizens. That's my closing comment. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Marj. Vikrant.
Yes, I second the thoughts of Miraj here. And I would say, when we talk about multiculturalism, it shouldn't be based on colors. It should be based on basic humanity and taking all community together. It should be about, helping Australians, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they can or they cannot do. So at this moment, India needs support, and Australian citizens in India needs support. We should be able to help them. We should be able to provide them, and we should be very, very, our outreach should not be dependent on who can afford to come back to Australia. That shouldn't be the thing. It should be all Australians should be helped, no matter which part of the world they are in. The government should be doing that, and they should be reaching out. If countries like India can do repatriation flights and get 6 million people back to India within 2-3 months of the pandemic started, then Australia can do it. It is a much more richer country. If India has the will, Australia can have that same will and can reach out to its own country. Men. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikrant. Marine?
With those of you who know me, know that I'm not backwards in coming forwards on the exact issues that we have been talking about racism, about discrimination, about how people of color and multicultural communities have been treated in Australia during COVID. So I can assure you that I will be taking all your messages and presenting them in a no holds barred manner to whoever is willing to listen. And if they're not willing to listen, then I'm going to stop them and get them to listen to those messages, because we cannot go on like this.
Amar.
Thank you. I think for the world power Australia is considered around the globe, playing with the big countries like US, Japan, UK. This is the time that we show the world how we look after our citizens, and this is the test. So no matter what happens, if India goes into strict lockdown, we should actually, maybe put up another island facility on one of the smaller islands that people can come to them, and there's plenty of resorts. But we should not let these people down. And frankly, what Maureen said before, I've used this tag right throughout COVID. We are in this together. And certainly, I tweeted it the other day as well. It's got an asterisk and says conditions apply. We are not in this together. Thank you.
Can I say, I just want to express my gratitude for each of you taking the time and for your work you're doing in community and in the public debate. The diaspora has really led this when the government has failed. And we look to you for the guidance. I know as a Greens MP at a state level, and I know Maureen too at a federal level, we've looked to you for guidance in our political work here, and we've had that strong, principled, unwavering guidance from all of you today. We're extremely grateful for that, and we promise to do everything we can. I know I have a motion on in the state parliament next week that I will want to bring to a vote on this very issue. And I think all of us here today, if not every part of politics in Australia, we know we're all in this together. So thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All the effort, guys. You're wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Amarji.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.